So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Institute for Medical Education's Medical Education Grand Rounds. As many of you know, the IME promotes and advances innovative medical education scholarship, as well as recognizes, supports, and sponsors outstanding educators. In our Medical Education Grand Round series, my team and I are committed to inviting speakers whose contributions focus on advancing equity and justice. We recognize that bias and discrimination have a profound impact on the lives of our patients and their families, the communities we serve, and on many of us who devote our lives to patient care, education, and research. We also know that medicine as a profession has lagged behind in terms of strategic intervention development, metric tracking, outcome reporting, and the enforcement of a climate of transparency and accountability as these pertain to bias and discrimination faced by those who are underrepresented in medicine and science, many of whom have intersectional identities that result in what we call double-blind marginalization. We are really deeply grateful then for our speaker today. Dr. Spector is dedicated to eliminating gender bias and discrimination in health professions. Her scholarship and life's work in this area are really remarkable, and I'm very grateful that she is here today to speak to us, to challenge us, and actually to call us to action. Dr. Spector is a professor of pediatrics and serves in dual roles at Drexel University College of Medicine and as executive director of the Hedwig van Amerongen Executive Leadership in Academic Medicine, the ELAM program, a national leadership fellowship program for women in academic medicine, dentistry, public health, pharmacy. She's also Associate Dean of Faculty Development. She's a founding member of Time's Up Healthcare and a member of PROUD, promoting and respecting our women doctors. I'm delighted she's here. And as a matter of format, thank you all for coming. So with that, welcome and thank you for being here.
So it's really fantastic to be here. Hi. It's fantastic to be here. Really honored to be here. I wanted to add to my lovely introduction that I'm a graduate from Brown University, and I understand there are a lot of Brown grads here, so yay. I do want to add disclosures. I have received grant funding from several funding agencies, as well as I received consulting fees for work I have done in professional development, leadership development, as well as in transitions in care. And I'm the executive director of the IPASS study group, which is a very large national study group, and we have formed a company called the IPASS Patient Safety Institute, and I do want to disclose that I am a co-founder and hold equity in that institution. So today we're going to focus on several things, and I always warn my audiences that I'm going to provide a lot of data that will bring the room down a little bit because it's kind of heavy. And then we're going to quickly turn, though, to positive energy, positive ideas, ways we can collaborate and move forward in innovative ways. So we're going to articulate the gender disparities in medicine, detail implicit bias and system-wide policies that disadvantage women as well as women with intersectionality, communicate the imperative to make rapid progress to close the gender gap, and describe best practices and innovative methods that can help us move forward, as well as really some exciting collaborations that are going on in the country. So we heard my professional bio, and I like to tell a little bit of my own story about how I came to do the work that I do. So I have had an amazing journey with some wonderful people in my life. And I start with the upper left-hand corner. Those are my parents and my brother. My parents were teachers in public schools in the 60s. And when my brother and I, started to think about what our careers were going to be, they both said that we could do anything, but we couldn't go into teaching. And the reason for that was that they felt that teachers were not well compensated, respected in the way they thought we should be respected in our careers. And very interestingly, over our journey, my brother became a corporate lawyer and I became a doctor. And at the same time, my dad then had this journey through education where he went to Brown, actually, and had a sabbatical there and was really excited to hear about my learning in my third year of medical school. So what he did is he ended up going to Brown, to the medical school, as a director of curriculum, and he oversaw the curriculum at Brown for 25 years. He was one of the first medical educators to become a leader of medical education in the country. And in the meantime, my path went from medicine all the way into education. And I was influenced by many people along the way, including the man on the top of the little picture. That's Dr. Daniel Shidlow, who was my first inpatient floor attending, who after my first week or month, I guess, said to me, you should do academic medicine, to which I said, what does that mean? Because I was the first doctor in my family, had no idea. And he has spent his whole career and my career mentoring me, sponsoring me, and he just retired last summer as the dean of my medical school, and he's the person who appointed me to my position now. There are many other people who have influenced me. My parents, my family have been amazing supports, as well as my research team and so many other experiences and organizations. Through my opportunities to do other extended training, I did have the opportunity to go to ELIM in 2009 and 10, and that for me was transformative. Because in that time, I worked with the most incredible women. My eyes were opened to the possibilities. And it was the most empowering time in my career. And I was opened up to the idea that really my sweet spot, where I love to do the work I do, is at the faculty level. I always ask faculty, what are your favorite levels of learner? And for me, it's faculty, and it's become mid-level faculty for men and women, but particularly for women. So my passion now is to advance women to the highest levels of leadership in this country. And you're all on that journey with me. I was also influenced, though, by the history of my own medical school and the institution that I work with. We have come from, my current institution, from Female Medical College of Pennsylvania, the first medical school in the world to train only women. It was established in 1850, and then it had a name change to Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania in 1867, and then in 1970, Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania became the Medical College of Pennsylvania. And why did that happen? What happened? Men were admitted to school, right? And men didn't want to go to the Women's Medical College. Then we had a merger with Hahnemann. Hahnemann has been in the news quite a bit. We just spoke about it, with a very catastrophic immediate closure, which I can talk about later. I've been asked now, my new speaking tour is on leading in turbulent times, so we can talk about that as well. But when those two schools merged together, there was another richness and diversity, because Hahnemann was actually the first medical school in Philadelphia to admit men and women of Irish, Jewish, and Italian descent. So we had these two schools merge with this incredibly rich history. And then in 2002, we became Drexel. So these are the firsts of women in medicine. By the way, under the offices of ELAM in Philadelphia, and you're close enough to take a quick train ride to me, is the largest archives in the world of women in medicine. People come from all over the world to study in our archives. And ironically, nobody in Philadelphia knows about them, or New York. So please come and see what we have. It's really impressive. My own daughter actually has put together this collection that I'm going to show you right now, and was really amazed at what was there. So Anne Preston started medical school in 1850 and graduated in 1851. 1851. And then in 1866, she became the first woman dean of Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania. And if you think about it, for those of you who have been part of ELAM, if you've been part of ELAM, raise your hand in the room, several people. There is a famous case called the Anne Preston School of Medicine, and it's named that because of Anne Preston. Then Hannah Longshore received her medical degree from our school in 1851, and 1853 became Philadelphia's first women physician, and was one of the first people to hold a faculty position in the United States. Rebecca Cole, unfortunately we don't have a picture of her, was the second African-American woman to receive a medical degree in the country. The first was actually graduated from New England Female Medical College. That no longer exists and does not have history from there. And then Dr. Joshi was the first Indian female physician. Dr. LaFlèche Picotte was the first Native American woman, actually the first two Native American women in the country graduated from our school, and Eliza Greer was the first to become a practicing physician, an African-American woman in Georgia. And it goes on and on and on and on. And what's amazing, if you come to our school, you will see pictures of women everywhere. And that is so different. In fact, these are my daughter's favorite pictures. On the left is the students playing with skeletons, and on the right is the operating amphitheater. Look at that picture. They're all women in that amphitheater, except for there's one man, a couple men just looking onwards. It's compared to the amphitheater pictures we see from Mass General, from Johns Hopkins. Very, very different. So why was ELAM founded? ELAM was founded actually to preserve the legacy of our school. Dr. Walter Cohen, who is the sponsor of ELAM, had the foresight to think, okay, we have to honor this history. We don't want it to be let go. So he did something. He sent a survey out to all the current deans in the country at the time, got a 95% response rate, if you can imagine that, with deans. And they all said, you know what you should do? You should do something that helps train women for leadership. That's what you should do. So that's what he did. So he enlisted Dr. Paige Morahan and others to start thinking about ELAM. So our first class was in 1995. That's when we had medical school fellows. Interestingly, Dr. Cohen was the former dean of dentistry at Penn. So he then said, you have to expand beyond medicine. So that's when we enrolled fellows from dental schools. Then we added pharmacy and public health. And then in 2012, we have had international students. And then in 2012, also our sister program for engineers. And also this is expanded to all the STEM fields. That program was founded. And if you think we have a challenging time, it's fascinating to teach in that program. So these are just our founders. And I particularly want to point out Dr. Cohen because he passed away about a year ago at 92. Still had an office in our suite and still came to work 3 days a week and was sharp as a tack and would leave articles on my desk, things I should read. Just amazing. And we would not be here today, meaning ELAM, and many of you as graduates, if it wasn't for Walter. So really want to honor him. So we are in our 25th year. Really amazing. Amazing and yet not. In that Paige Morahan, our founder, says over and over again, 25 years ago, she thought we would not need ELAM. They honestly thought, that group who started ELAM thought we would achieve equity at every level of leadership. So we've had great success. Currently, we have 1,084 graduates. Over half of them serve in leadership positions in 263 institutions, mostly in the United States, but throughout Canada and some other countries as well. So hold many high-level positions. You can see that in medical schools, 15 of the 29 women deans have come through ELAM, and half of the dental deans have come from ELAM. We track dean by dean, every appointment, every transition. Many of you probably saw in the news and through social media that Dr. Nancy Brown and Elam just became the first woman dean at Yale. So we're really excited about those successes. And our ELAMs hold many, many other leadership roles and department chairs and center directors. So now we're going to think about the context, though. So women in practice, as you know, depending on the field, we hold the vast majority of positions. Actually, I'm a pediatrician by training. 63% of our field are women. Having said that, look at the numbers still, and we track these every year with the AAMC's input. So in medicine, that means our whole discipline of medicine, not internal medicine. In medicine, 26% of full professors are women, 18% chairs, and 18% deans are women. Just going to let that sit for a little bit. So 25 years ago, we thought we were going to have equity at these levels, and here we are today. And it actually carries through in the other disciplines as well. And we all know this. In 2019, women comprised the majority of the enrolled U.S. medical students for the first time, and yet, despite us being 34% of the entire workforce, we are still not at critical mass. And by critical mass, I define that as 30% or more. So there need to be 30% more of women and women of intersectionality at the table, critical mass, to make big change, and we're not there yet. This is another interesting phenomenon to me. If you look at assistant deans, associate deans, senior associate deans, and deans, we go from 46% women, 39% women, 33% women, 18% women. There are a lot of things that factor into that, but one of the big things is the assistant dean's roles are often the service roles, the caretaking roles. My role, Dean of Faculty Development, Dean of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Dean of Women. We can go on and on. But the senior associate dean roles, the deans of research, the deans of finance, etc., are more likely men. So many of you may have seen this recent article by Reshma Jacksie. Dr. Reshma Jacksie is a current fellow in ELAM. She has written quite a bit about the gender equity issues, and she's really a champion here. She published this data in the New England Journal of Medicine about October. And what she did is they projected how long it would take for us to reach equity if we go at the pace we're going. For deans and chairs roles, the year is 2070. I will be retired by then. I don't know about any of you, but that's a long time. So we're not alone. So this is a common issue across the country. So in comparison, corporate America, women are 58% of the workforce, yet 23% of the C-suite positions are held by women. And in the Fortune 500 companies, they're really not doing well. 6.6% are women. And if you've been following the trends nationally, they're dropping. They're dropping. And only 0.25% of the Fortune 500 board seats are held by women. And for those of you who are currently with me at ELAM and have recently been with me at ELAM know that one of my big passions recently is to help women get on boards. Because if we think of the power and influence structures of our institutions, the power is on the boards, and we are not present at the boards. And historically, it's fascinating on boards. I took a course on women on boards that there usually are no standard practices for nominating or selecting board positions. There are no term limits. So what happens is that the people who are on the boards invite their friends to be on the boards, and then they stay because, in addition, you can make $230,000 a year on a corporate board. And if you think about, so I'm thinking about my own president who has a nice salary, and he serves on 2 corporate boards. So if you think about that, why would you want to leave? And people then retire from their normal job, and then they can serve on several boards. So the infrastructure is not set up well. There's legislature now in California and several other states to mandate the number of women on boards, but still the mandates aren't at critical mass. So again, we're not going to be able to make big change till then. In healthcare industry, we're 65% of the workforce overall, across nursing, et cetera, and yet only 13% of our CEOs are women and 29% of COOs are women. The women CEOs and COOs have formed a new collaboration called the Women of Impact, which is led by Joanne Conroy, who is the president and CEO at Dartmouth Hitchcock, and she has brought all these women together to start thinking about bigger ways to move metrics in healthcare. So there'll be more to come about that. I might talk about that later if we have time. The disparity issues continue, and why is this important? Because all of our academic advancement is linked to our funding and our ability to publish, right? Of the most prestigious journals in our country, only 10% of the editors are women, the editors. And if you look across the board in the highest impact journals, only 10% senior authorship across is women. So most of those senior positions are held by men. We have further disparities to think about, the challenges women have in finding mentors and sponsors, attainment of independent grant funding. There's a lot of work going on at the NIH currently to look at that, rates of promotion and pay. And we were just talking about this earlier with a group. There's often a solo woman leader with a male majority, which puts that woman at a lot of jeopardy because women are scrutinized in a very different way. And if they misstep, it's very visible. And if they're deposed, they cannot get another job easily. And I have case study after case study of women who've been deposed in high-level jobs where it's taken 3-4 years to get a new job. And that isn't always the case for our male colleagues. We still have gender bias, pay gap bias. women are paid 76 to 90 cents on the dollar to men across medicine. And in peds, you'd think we're 63% of the workforce. I just published a paper in October that shows, no, we're not. We're, again, in that range per dollar compared to men. This is a national statistic across all disciplines, but equal pay day in the United States, meaning all of the women in the United States had to work until we made the same amount that men made on December 31st the year before, that was April 2nd. For Black women, it was August 22nd, and for Latino women, it was November 20th. I was giving a presentation on November 20th, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's the end of the year, and here we are in this situation. We do have slower promotions, and there are also issues around linking wages to marriage and parenthood. We're going to pay the man more, he's supporting a family, versus sometimes women get penalized. The pay issues, the pay equity issues are really fraught with a lot of difficulty that I'm happy to talk about at the end. We have other issues. Did I tell you this is where we're feeling really not great about ourselves? There's a lot of good stuff, though. Unconscious bias, gender stereotypes, the demands of family life, and underinvestment of social capital are really critically important. So unconscious bias, many of you saw this article that was published around speaker introductions, and these subtle little things that happen that really make a big difference. So they looked at whether men and women were introduced by their formal titles, doctor roles, depending whether they were introduced by a man or a woman. And not surprising, men were less likely to introduce a woman by their doctor titles and roles than women. I'm looking at the few men in the room, and so this idea will stick in your head. By the way, there's a group of medical students who are now residents across the country who are continuing to look at these biases that happen because they're influenced by that as they're choosing their careers, etc. There's also this issue, there's a great paper I have if you want to see it, on agentic and communal properties in leadership. So men are generally in leadership roles associated with agentic qualities. So aggressive, ambitious, dominant, self-confident, forceful, self-reliant, and individualistic. If a woman has these qualities, what happens to them? Yeah, exactly. And really unlikable. And I have to challenge people all the time about this. I just had a conversation at a Women in Medicine retreat, and this woman said, she just always seems angry. So I don't think I want to work with her. I said, is she angry or is she agentic? And so we started talking about it. It turns out she's agentic, and she's not as likable because she's so forceful in her opinions. So we have that problem as women. However, we're really associated with these kinds of characteristics: affectionate, helpful, kind, sympathetic, sensitive, gentle, and well-spoken. If we lead in this way, what happens to us? We're weak. This is the double bind. Ideally, all leaders, men and women, should flex between agentic and communal styles, as well as other components of leadership. But we have a challenging time in that we're kind of stuck. If we're too communal, we're weak. If we're too agentic, we're not well liked, and we have trouble leading in either situation. So we have to be aware of these biases and try to call them out and think very carefully about how we're judging people and what stories are we telling, and are we really looking carefully at really the leader themselves. Here's the good news. Guess what? Women treat patients really, really well. And I love these two studies that both show, one in JAMA Internal Medicine and one in the BMG, that if you're treated by a woman physician, there's lower odds of death. That's a pretty positive, right? So there are many, many articles that are writing about now the positives of women in leadership, and if you have a diverse workforce and a diverse leadership team, how you have a better return on investment and how the teams function better. There's lots and lots of literature on this. So what can we do? So we're at a time now we really have to take a very critical look at our institutions, our infrastructure, and look very intentionally at what the issues are. And so this is a equity, diversity, and inclusion cycle that Dr. Julie Silver, who's at Harvard, who does a lot of work in this space also, and I developed for a recent article. it's like a PDSA cycle, basically. It's examine the equity, diversity, inclusion data, be transparent, report it to stakeholders, investigate causality, implement strategic solutions, track outcomes, and then publish and disseminate results, share best practices, etc. Dr. Silver also has started with her group called Promoting and Respecting Our Women Doctors, which I'm a member of, a campaign called the Be Ethical campaign, which is online, easily accessible. It's a really nice white paper which looks at issues around individuals, leaders, institutions, journals, professional societies, looking at what the issues are, giving some really great resources. It was written about 2 years ago, hasn't been updated, but is still completely relevant, and a lot of people are using it as a basis to kind of launch initiatives from. And the whole idea is that it's our ethical imperative to make our workforce and our workspaces equitable, inclusive, and safe. It's an ethical imperative. This has been reinforced by last week, the AAMC, Association of American Medical Colleges, released a statement on gender equity. And so Dr. Diana Lautenberger and some colleagues got together. They have published this imperative that we need to move on the equity issue. And they have created a campaign. They're forming a group called the Gender Equity Lab, which is a place for us to report our best practices, et cetera, for us to disseminate our best practices. So there will be more to come on this. It just launched last week, so there's not a lot out there yet, but please pay attention. It will be more. Well, what can we do for individuals? For women and men, I think everybody needs leadership training. I think our next step in leadership training is going to be he for she training, actually. There's a big group of us starting to think about that. Actively seeking out mentorship and sponsorship, garnering the skills of graceful self-promotion, which is a whole nother hour lecture we could do, which is a lot of fun. Optimize the professional network and shore up social capital. I mentioned earlier that women underinvest in social capital. I cannot emphasize that enough. We do not spend enough time building our networks, getting our networks supporting us so that we can be successful. And even it's sad for me too, even women who go through ELIM sometimes are in really difficult situations and don't reach out because they think they are supposed to solve the problems by themselves. And yet we need to work together to move things forward. And there are a lot of reasons we underinvest in social capital. We have other responsibilities often that we're caring for. In that pediatrics paper I just wrote, women physicians in pediatrics spend 8 hours a week more doing household things than their male counterparts. So that's 8 hours in currently. Did you say that's not enough? Low? That's low, probably. How about strategies for leaders and institutions? We have to avoid having a sole female member of a team, or particularly in a leadership team, and we need a critical mass. So if I can't emphasize enough that 30%, you need 30%. And we have to move away from women not being kind to other women and calling that out. I have a couple recent stories too of in very traditional medical schools where there are only 2 or 3 women chairs of the mass, where the other women aren't supporting the other women chairs, and that is just a terrible situation. Again, ensuring that critical mass of women leaders, and we need to support them as they become leaders. So that's the next actually iteration of ELAM will be working with women who acquire those very high-level positions, dean, chair, dean, provost, president, to see how we can best support them to be successful and to navigate in very tricky waters. All the policies and procedures around family leave, et cetera, need to be looked at. And we need to figure out better ways to welcome women back who step away from work, as well as encourage men to take the same benefits that women do to normalize the whole. So those are some things to do. I love this story. So how many of you saw that when Francis Collins sent out a declaration when everywhere, social media, that he would no longer serve on a manel, which is an all-male panel? I am thrilled he said this. He is the director of the NIH. It's great. He's a male ally. He said it got attention. I think my colleagues and I have been asking for this for 10 years. My female colleagues, 10 years. And there's a policy from the 1980s at the NIH said that there always needs to be diversity on panels. So isn't that fascinating? So that really strikes me as something we need to capitalize on. We need to engage our male allies and our white male allies in particular as much as possible to make the bigger change. And so that's why a big effort is going into that. By the way, you'll see here, right, there's 2 men in the room? 3, sorry. Or more? I'm sorry. Typically, when I speak, I'm speaking mostly to women. And we need to get the men at the table, in the room, in these conversations, to have the hard conversations. That's the only way we're going to make change. There are a lot of different strategies. You're probably utilizing these already, really emphasizing the importance of the women in medicine and science committees. Best practices for me, by the way, is they're not all women at the table and not all junior women. I see that a lot. I go into institution after institution. I've been in 25 institutions in the last 2 years. And often they're very junior women trying to figure it out by themselves. And that's not probably the best model. Leadership training, really, really important. Oh my gosh, I didn't say the most important thing at all. While we're thinking about this, we have to move away from the idea that we have to fix the woman. It's the woman's problem. She didn't get the job because, et cetera, et cetera. We have to move away from that conversation. I mean, this is something we all have to do together. I talked about the family leave issues. Sexual harassment. I am not an expert in sexual harassment, but there certainly are a lot of best practices out there that you probably know more about than implicit bias training, all the things we know about the infrastructure in our environment that needs to be fixed through policies and procedures. That really is the best way to do this, is policies and procedures, but not just writing them, but moving on them. So that's a tricky next step, right? Because that requires a lot of big change. For the pay inequity issues, it's really hard because if you uncover the inequity, you have to fix it. It's an HR issue. And then that makes it really difficult for some institutions because it puts them in a really difficult financial situation. So how people navigate that is difficult, although I've seen people do it really, really, really well. I'm looking at Karen because she came from Colorado, and the Department of Peds did a fantastic job recently of navigating through that. Performance evaluations need to be objective. There's a whole body of literature coming out now, which many of you have seen, about the biases in language that's used. Medical students writing evaluations about faculty, letters of recommendation that we write for men and women, letters of promotion, letters of awards. It goes on and on and on. It's fascinating. There are actually computer programs that will look at the gender bias of a letter. I just found this out. I just read an article one of our ELIMs wrote, so I can share that with you. But it's really important. In fact, for ELAM, we just started an awards committee that has several different strategies. One is we are creating awards for ELAM so that we can promote people. 2, we are creating a resource list of every high-level award in the country. The Lasker Awards, those are the highest science awards. 5 white men won those awards this year, 5. We're also creating a letter writing best standard module for people so that they will know how. And we're hoping to make it online so that we can disseminate it beyond ELAM. Mentorship and sponsorship is critically important. And I don't want to underemphasize the importance of thinking about the intersectionality issues. I'm very proud to say for the past 3 years, I think, since I've been the executive director, over a third of each of our ELAM classes have underrepresented in medicine members. So we are working very hard to think about that as well and learning along the way. Mentorship and sponsorship, I think, is incredibly interesting. This is from the business world. Ibera writes quite a bit in this space. By the way, if you don't read Harvard Business Review, you should be reading it every day. I mean, our ideas are coming from the business world. So women in this study had at least one mentor, and more likely to have 4 or more mentors, but were less likely to be promoted. And why is that? It has to do with not being sponsored. So often women aren't in the right place at the right time to hear about the right opportunity and are not sponsored. And men and women are sponsored quite differently currently. So what is sponsorship? A coach tells you what to do. A mentor will listen to you and speak with you, but a sponsor will talk about you. I love this. So this is a concept that was introduced by Ibera, and then Liz Travis, Dr. Liz Travis, who's at MD Anderson, she's the vice president for women at MD Anderson, who's an Elam, brought this concept into medicine and has been writing about it periodically. And her definition is public support by a powerful, influential person for the advancement and promotion of an individual within whom he or she sees untapped or unappreciated leadership talent or potential that can catapult nascent talent to rising star status. There's a reciprocal relationship here, a sponsee or protege. I hate the word mentee, by the way. It's not a pleasant sounding thing. They need to work hard, be self-motivated, demonstrate trust, and not abandon their sponsor. I've seen that. People like get to the next opportunity and then they take off with another sponsor. Show loyalty and promote their legacy. That's a really important component of that. By the way, one of the really important components of sponsorship is not just to help the person get to that committee, to get that award, to get that advancement, but then to make sure they're successful in that role. It's a longitudinal obligation. It's not a one and done kind of thing. And women can sponsor women and men can sponsor women with equal success. So we should be developing a culture of sponsorship. And that's what I've been trying to promote, particularly among our very high-level leaders. How about the journals? I mentioned that only 10% of the highest impact journals have editors as women. For those of you who did not see this, this is a great edition of The Lancet in February of last year. They had a whole edition dedicated to women in leadership, women's medical issues, etc. It's a great edition. They also declared that they were going to dedicate themselves to gender equity in their own journal. And I just saw on social media today that of their 19 journals, 16 of them have over half of their editorial boards are women. They have 19 journals, and they say there's a range from 35 to 63, so a couple of those journals are not doing very well, but I don't know which ones. More to come, I guess. And I do not know. I did not see it reported. If somebody finds it, that I have no idea how many of the editors, the top editor, are women and how many are men. So they are showing the way, and we have to follow. How about funding sources? So this is Dr. Hannah Valentine. She's the Chief Scientific Workforce Diversity Officer at the NIH. She's also an Elam. And she has been working very tirelessly to think about the infrastructure of the NIH, what the diversity is there, what the leadership structure is there, intramural, how that interfaces with the extramural side, how that influences who gets funded, et cetera, et cetera. So here's a quick story. In Science, in May 2019, there was an article written that the NIH, under Francis Collins and Dr. Valentine's leadership, had created term limits for the lab and branch chiefs. The lab, so at the NIH, if you know that structure, by the way, we had a recent 2-day visit there, fascinating, and they gave me their organizational chart, which was like 50 pages long on 2 font. It's a very complicated organization, as you know, because there are 27 institutes. So at the NIH, there's the director, and then below that, there are the lab and branch chief director roles. There have not been historic term limits at the NIH. There is one director at the NIH who, a white man, has been in his role for 50 years. So thinking about that, an opportunity, so there are very few leadership opportunities in the NIH on the intramural side. So their idea was to create term limits, 8-year term limits. in an effort to start moving along. And this was published in Science. I went to the NIH 2 days after that declaration was overturned. And I understand it has to do with contracts and HR and all that kind of thing. Well, I walked into that experience, first of all, very unaware. But wow, as you can imagine, there was a lot of women who were very upset by this happening. And so I know they're continuing their journey here, but if we don't make change in those types of organizations, we will still have this trickle-down effect to us and our science and who gets published and who gets funded and all of that type of thing. I'm sure of it because of all the infrastructure bias that happens there. By the way, the funny kind of tie-in here, maybe funny, maybe not, the day after I came back, I think, from this visit, I opened up the New England Journal of Medicine to see Dr. Reshma Jacksie's paper, the one with the graph. You got to read it, because the first line is about term limits. I think the title has term limits, and it highlights the NIH as an exemplar for term limits. So take a look at that article. So that's fascinating. There was an article which I haven't read yet in this week's Academic Medicine titled "Are We Ready for Term Limits in Academic Medicine?" So I'd be interested to read that. So it's just another component of the infrastructure. However, having said that, NIH has its historic first in that 10 women now lead of the 27 institutes. And now 11 with the addition of an Elam, who is the director of Deafness and Communication Disorders Institute. So hopefully making progress. So collaboration. So I understand you're a signator of Time's Up Healthcare. I'm a founding member. We launched a year ago and we have been thinking creatively, what should we do? I mean, we have to start thinking outside our typical boxes. And so what we did is, Time's Up is partnering with the U.S. women's national soccer team. So as you know, they've won 2 World Cups, right? There you have a major pay gap issue compared to the men, really big one. And one of my colleagues said to me recently, which totally resonates, is they shouldn't have equal pay. They should be getting paid more. The men's team is not doing that well. So we're collaborating with them, and they're getting a lot of national attention in order to bring our ideas and things to a much higher level of attention. This was a fun thing. This was our launch. We launched through InStyle magazine, which is a whole nother story. I mean, this one picture took hours and hours. And there was more photo shoots of the 6 core founders, some of them who are actually in New York City. But what was really fun is this feature was one of the top read InStyle in 2019. So there's a lot of attention. A lot of people are interested in the work that we're doing. There are many other really, really cool collaboratives. So many of you probably have heard that Melinda Gates has pledged a lot of money for the gender equity issues in the country. And I was very fortunate to be part of a planning grant in collaboration with a group from Stanford and Global Health. And that was successful in acquiring permanent funding for the program from the Gates Foundation to lead a global leadership for women program across the world for 2,500 women in the next couple of years. So we're just starting the work and the planning of that. The reason this came up is the women who were leading this program, Dr. Michelle Berry and her colleagues, have an annual global health conference, and they said on a whim that the day before, when they were hosting it at Stanford, that they were going to host a leadership conference for women, and they had enough spots for 60 people, and 500 people applied. So very, very important work. I'm very appreciative to the Gates Foundation because they're really, really investing in these initiatives. I mentioned the Women of Impact. They are forming a collaborative, which is just getting going with many organizations. They are enlisting healthcare systems to join them in thinking about metrics that are going to be measured, that are going to be reported out on all types of things related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Again, using metrics to move the needle. So we'll see. That group is working as well. There's a collaboration of all the organizations you see here to develop longitudinal leadership programming for women at a very more junior position in their careers. We just finished our first cohort. It was a fabulous experience. But as a part of this work, we're trying to get all those 6 organizations together to create metrics to move back into our own professional societies to use. So how many awards women are, how many presidents are there in our organizations and that type of thing. This is something you can do easily. This comes out of Julie Silver's work. She leads healthcare. She has a Need Her Science campaign. There are 2 parts to this. If you go on, you simply have to sign a pledge. The pledge is that every time you submit an article, that you'll go look at the editorial process and review process and see if there's equity. Doesn't mean you shouldn't submit there. So still submit to Science, Nature, New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA. These are all, by the way, organizations that don't have parity on their editorial boards. Take a look. That puts a little bit of pressure. On the flip side, we have been doing 2 things. We've been reaching out to all the editors of the journals, asking them to do 2 things. One is to make anything related to equity, diversity, inclusion open access so that you don't have to pay, so that we can share the literature broadly. That's the first thing we're asking. Second thing we're asking is to consider equity, diversity, and inclusion in your entire process. I'm going to give a shout out to my friend, Dr. Samir Shah, who's the editor of Journal of Hospital Medicine. He just took the role of editor, and the first thing he did is look at the equity, diversity, inclusion issues across from reviewers, who submits articles, who's invited for commentaries, what his editorial board looks like. He has really put a really significant effort into that. I give him a great shout out. He's ahead of the curve. I would say Lancet is ahead of the curve. I have been inviting myself to editorial board meetings. That's been a lot of fun. I have a great story to share where I was in a huge room like this. I think it's this many people on the editorial board, and the editor and the 2 senior associate editors, all 3 men, were sitting in a block in the middle at the table, and then everybody else was in this big room. And I was sitting in the corner of the room, and they asked me to get up to present from my seat, and I stood up and I said, I would like to sit in Dr. X's seat, please. And I moved up, sat right in the middle where he had to sit in my little corner seat. And I talked to them, and it was fascinating because, and this was a pediatrics journal, they did not know. They had all these aha moments. I was the one who told them how many men, women, underrepresented in medicine were on their editorial board. And I started sharing a lot of the data that you just heard. And then one of the very senior men in the room, who I thought was going to give me a lot of pushback, because I know him and I've heard he can give a lot of pushback. I was completely ready for him. He started calculating who was in the senior editorial. He said, we're all men. I didn't have to say anything. So I looked around at my 2 associate people, and yeah. So they are making some, recently actually, they sent out that whole, I'm looking at Karen because she's a pediatrician, a whole solicitation of editors for all the journals that fall under this organization. So I'm hoping we're making some progress, but we all need to do this together. We all need to do this together. Many of you have probably heard about, because it's actually been in New York the last couple of years, is FemInM, Females in Emergency Medicine, started by Dr. Derek Hess, Dr. Esther Chu, and others. They are on fire. I just a fascinating experience of these little TED Talks that are presented around equity issues. They've been selling out like that, first year, second year, 24 hours. I was able to attend one. It was great. By the way, thinking about the whole communal agentic stuff I told you about, this was fascinating to me. One of the TED Talks was a transgender man in the emergency room. He was an emergency room physician. He had been a woman and now is a man. And he talked about what it was like to be a woman in the emergency room and then a man in the emergency room caring for patients. And as an agentic woman, your comment, he was a negative words. Then he became a man, And he said when he put a blanket on a patient, he was getting like applause. It was fascinating. It was just fascinating. You know, it's a little case control study right there. ELAM. So here we are moving towards our 25th. We're really excited. For anybody in the ELAM community, I have been, putting this date in your calendars, like taking your phones away from you, because it's such an important time to pause. We are going to be celebrating, again, our 25 years. We will have at that time 1,143 graduates, because it's the day after graduation of this current cohort. Our day includes all these activities, so focusing on women on boards, thinking about awards, all those kind of strategies that I mentioned earlier throughout this whole experience, as well as Dr. Esther Chu, who is one of the main founders of Times Up Healthcare, is going to talk to us about the future of Times Up Healthcare and how we can all work together. She's not a doctor. I'm so used to now asking or adding the title to everybody's names. Jill Ellis, who's the historic head coach of the U.S. Women's National Soccer Team, is going to be our keynote speaker. We're going to have somebody Kathy Siders, she's a coach at ELIM, and she is going to interview her. And why we picked Kathy is she's a professional coach in medicine, but she also coaches professional and elite collegiate coaches in basketball. So she kind of crosses both worlds, and then we'll have some celebration. I was never on Twitter until Barbara Overholzer here, raise your hand. Our relationship and communications person came, and I always have to tell the story because I started out on Twitter and I had about 20 followers from leaders in medicine, and my niece followed me, and I was so new to Twitter, and I'm terrible with technology, and she tweeted something, and I was trying to delete it, and I retweeted it. It was a tweet about the Kardashian family, so I have been very careful not to be too active on Twitter, but Barbara is very active. So at ELAM Program is our Twitter handle, and we try to amplify as much as we can the work that people are doing individually, articles that people write. I met last weekend the woman who started the movement, I Look Like a Surgeon. Did you see that on Twitter? So there was a New Yorker article with 4 women on the cover, and she started a Twitter campaign of having women from all over the world actually take pictures of 4 women looking down. I look like a surgeon. And it's been amazing. She's been interviewed by the Washington Post, the New York Times. It's gotten a ton of publicity. And so being creative are other things we're trying to look at. But all the people on this list are people who amplify the voices of the underrepresented in medicine. And on a daily basis, you'll see somebody writes an article. It could be in your science or it could be on equity, and we amplify it. And how helpful that is for women, as well as connecting. I have met all of these women now, and we're all trying to collaborate. We're trying to break down the silos of our organizations and move together in a much more meaningful way. And so that I will close. This is my favorite picture, that our future is bright. And thank you so much for your attention.